Hi, everybody. I'm Jason. I think you already have the context, but me and Eric are half of So Percussion. We're a percussion quartet, and we've been around for 20-ish years now. We came out of a grad school situation. So we started actually in 1999. We started as grad students at the Yale School of Music, where we all studied, got our masters. And the program there it's a classical degree, but it's very kind of chamber music based. And so our kind of lineage comes out of chamber music and very contemporary music. And I think we would talk about our lineage as very much an experimental music lineage. So folks like John Cage and a kind of scene in the 30s and 40s in San Francisco and New York that were exploring new ways of making structuring music with noise and with sounds, found sounds, really kind of went to percussion. So that's kind of our basis. But from there, we've branched out and done many things, played music by composers as part of that lineage. I think our two kind of touchstones of the lineage are very much the kind of experimentalists, kind of New York based in the 30s and 40s, and then the minimalists also New York based in the 70s. And then we moved to New York. And so we're kind of a part of the New York scene. Folks like Bang on a Can, that kind of post minimal scene is where we jumped into. And then in addition to commissioning new pieces and playing older pieces, we write a lot of our own music as well. And so I guess part of the context for us of this conversation is just how different it is to talk to people where we're making music not in the same space, right? And so I imagine all of you are thinking about that on some level, and what's really been on our minds, and this can be maybe a context to jump off of if you all want to, I think was like, I don't know what the 5 stages of grief are. I don't know what exactly they are, and I wonder how much we hit them along the way, right? Because I think I very much realized how much I miss playing music for people in a space together. So there's definitely that grief of, wait a minute, like we're supposed to be touring right now. We're supposed to be sharing what we do on stage with audiences, and we love doing that. How come we can't do that anymore? But then I think a next stage was realizing that part of what we do is definitely that, make music in the room together. But also we're parts of other types of music that are made in different ways, where sometimes it's less a composition that's handed to you and you play it. Sometimes it's more a collaborative process that happens in a room together, but sometimes it's a collaborative process that happens by sharing sounds with each other and having people add sounds to each other and seeing where things go. So we kind of double down on that side of what we do, and most of what we've been doing these last, I don't know, does anybody know them? 8, I guess. 8 months? Is that the is that the world, the quarantine world is 8 months? Most of what we've been doing with these 8 months has been very much a remote collaboration. We've been in the same space together as a band 2 times, where we did these video shoots for shows in New York. So we've given 2 concerts or recorded 2 concerts, but most of what we've done has been working remotely. So the last thing I'll say about that, and then I can pass it over to Eric too, just for a little more context, is like thinking about what music works in that scenario is interesting, and thinking about what music works to collaborate on remotely, what music works recorded as opposed to live, and a lot of what we ended up going to is kind of flexible instrumentation pieces. And a lot of those at first were pieces that I've made or that we've made collectively that were not written for any specific instruments. They were written for layers. And so we could find, this, my bedroom now is my studio. And so, I know what instruments I have. I can find things in my house to make sounds on. I have a drum set. I have a Fender Rhodes keyboard. I have some pipes and some access to some instruments I can bring home from Princeton. What music can I make? And so a lot of the music we've been making has been our own music, because we can kind of obviously have a lot of ownership over how we can make that music and how we can change it. Oh, we usually play this on a marimba and a vibraphone. Maybe now we can play it on a piano and a Rhodes. But also, be really creative in inviting other instrumentalists into that process, because that's something you can actually do now in some ways easier than you could before, right? We can work with people no matter where they are in this remote world. And so trying to look at that in a positive way. So a lot of that flexible instrumentation music has been mine. I should say we've discovered in this moment that that's a mode that we love working in. And when we've commissioned other composers to write for us, we've never commissioned composers to write flexible instrumentation pieces. So we've started a commissioning process in this quarantine moment that's all about flexible commissions, which has been, I guess we wouldn't have necessarily discovered that that was such a way of making music that we were yearning for if it wasn't for this kind of crazy moment. Eric, I probably left you nothing to say, but I'll pass the mic over to you in case you want to give any more context.
Oh, I love the 5 stages of grief. Yeah, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Yeah, I've definitely hit some of those, maybe in out of order sometimes, but um, yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of this stuff is familiar to you all. I mean, I'm sure you're all on Zoom calls for probably 10 or 12 hours a day these days, and that has changed a lot about everybody's lives, right? So there were a few references that we went to a bunch right at the beginning of all this, and I was just trying to find links so that I could send them here. One is a really good podcast worth a listen. Um, it's the podcast is called Cautionary Tales, but this episode is about the pianist Keith Jarrett and the recording of this very famous concert, the Cologne concert. Um, it's probably Keith Jarrett's most famous solo piano album, and Keith Jarrett was known for doing these albums where uh, he would he would tour and play these live performances that were entirely improvised, right? So he would sit down and sometimes he'd yell, somebody would yell out like E minor, and he would just start there and he would improvise the entire show. And the Cologne concert is sort of legendary because he showed up to do this performance, and the piano they got was actually the wrong piano. The presenter, like the company that was renting the piano or whatever, had delivered the wrong one, and it was basically broken. Like the action was messed up on a bunch of the keys. The low end was almost busted, and so it didn't sound good. Some of the keys didn't work. It wasn't resonating the way that it was supposed to. And Keith Jarrett almost canceled the concert, but the presenter was so desperate that he was like, okay, fine, I'll figure out something that I can do. And having to respond to this basically broken instrument basically made him play in this way that he wasn't used to playing, and he came up with all these incredible creative ideas on the spot. Now that's not to say that every pianist would sit down at a broken piano and have the best night of their lives, but the podcast sort of jumps off of that story and looks at other times that people have had sort of creative restrictions. They talk about the producer Brian Eno a bunch. I don't know if you guys know Brian Eno. He's sort of famous for creating the idea of ambient music. He has these 4 ambient, well, he has a bunch of ambient albums that sort of established the genre, but he was also a producer, worked with U2 and David Bowie and like all of the sort of legends of the 70s and 80s and 90s. Um, and David Bowie liked to work with restrictions in the recording studio a lot. So he would often tell people like, don't play your instrument the way that you're used to playing it. He would make people like, oh, you're used to sitting down while you're playing. Well, I want you to stand up, or, I want you to set up your drums backwards than the way you're normally playing. Cause he was constantly trying to make people who were professionals and virtuosos at their instrument have to approach it some different way. And I guess this podcast, we were just listening to it and thinking about it a lot when the pandemic started, because it feels like the pandemic is this forced restriction that we've all had to deal with. And, you guys are doing this series right now, right? And like, so Percussion is doing things like we're all trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep our practice moving forward? What are things that we can do on Zoom? What are things that we can do remotely that feel like um, real work, real collaborations? So definitely this podcast is worth a listen. There's another book um, called The Producer as Composer. It's by I think it's actually the the doctoral thesis for a Princeton student, but that got turned into this book, and oops, sorry, copy paste error. And kind of in a similar way, Jason and I both were rereading this book recently and thinking about the role that producers play in a lot of music that we listen to. As classical musicians, we're sort of used to the idea that the composer is this singular force and puts these ideas down on paper and like has all of the musical ideas. And then as performers, we're supposed to be these virtuoso, realizers of those amazing ideas that the singular genius had. And the producer as composer very much like talks about how in popular music, at least, it's very comfortable thinking about the idea that lots of different people are involved in the creative process. And it kind of makes the argument that oftentimes producers in the recording studio are making the decisions that we think of as the decisions that composers typically make. And the book goes into some of the ways that that plays out in a bunch. I mean, it talks about Brian Eno also as a producer. Talks about some of the sort of more legendary producers from different schools of thought. One of the stories that stuck out to me in particular was when they talk about Motown and how one of the things about the Motown record label was that it was in Detroit, and so like a lot of the people they worked with worked in the car factories and knew the fact that the car stereos going into the factory had these particular limitations. And so the label started to produce music that would sound good on car stereos. And that created the Motown sound. And then other people tried to mimic that sound, but for totally different context. It was created for this one reason to respond to this one particular moment in time, which was like cars are being mass produced. There's stereos in those cars. How are we making music that works for that context? But then it becomes its own sound, and then other people are using it in all kinds of different contexts. And again, for me, it brought up the question of like, okay, so when we're making music for streaming, when we're making music for Zoom, when we're making music online these days, what are the particularities of that context? And then like, okay, what if we get good at that thing? Then can we take those skills and transplant them and use them in other ways in the future? Um, so that maybe leads to, I think we were going to talk a little bit about our Brooklyn Bound concert series. Jay, did you want to play maybe one of the examples from our most recent one?
Yeah, is it helpful to share anything, or are there so many questions? I was trying to gather from your introduction, Jenny, if there are just a lot of questions that we should jump there, or is it useful to show anything that we've been up to?
It would be great if you guys had things to show.
Awesome, great.
As with, I just have questions that I've gathered that if we get to them, that's great. And if other
Awesome.
people want to jump in and ask questions, I think that's also great. But for sure, stage is yours.
Yeah, why don't we? That's great. Why don't we play one? Because I think one thing we realized in this moment too is that, I mean, the spring was the spring, and everybody was just kind of dealing, right? But then for a touring ensemble that had, we had our whole year planned, right? And none of it's happening, right? And so then we realized, like, wow, we're actually, I guess, we're self-producing now, right? We're saying we have a concert series that we used to do in our studio where 40 people would pack into our studio and see some music, and we'd share some work that we were doing, oftentimes work in progress, kind of experiments, and we'd have some friends in to share some things that they were doing. And so now we've taken that series online once a month, and it's been a great space to bring in other folks to share their work, and then for us to kind of have space to experiment ourselves. So like I was saying, one of the things you can do in this time is collaborate with other people in some ways more easily, only location wise, right? Only geographically more easily. It's always awesome. Any of these folks that we've been collaborating with, it would have been awesome to be in the same room as them. But to be able to say, okay, we don't have to worry about plane tickets. We don't have to worry about train tickets. What can we do? So we had thought maybe it's only, I think, about 6 minutes of music if we play two of these pieces, and they're from a very new set of music that I wrote, and so it's taking on, this is kind of our first time out with it, and we've been really looking to not have to think about them as these are percussion quartets, but think about them as like these are pieces that we can play with our friends and take in different directions each time we play them. So one of the pieces one of the movements, it's called Watt Pond. I'm really proud that I said that title because they've had these working titles forever. And we're really trying to going from working title to actual title is just an awkward transition. So just so everybody knows, I just nailed it. I didn't say Coda, I said Watt Pond. And this one, we decided to feature a bunch of singers because we had a lot of singers on our Brooklyn Bound series. And so we made a kind of awesome choir of 3 singers, and then an awesome string section from folks who had sat in on Brooklyn Bound as well. So the string section is a viola, cello, and a South Korean instrument, the hegum, a 2-stringed instrument. It's awesome where the bow is actually like hooked in between the strings, and you pull one way to do the one string and you push the other way to get the other string. It's a amazing sound. And then we play a little bit of percussion on it. And then the second piece is a piece where we feature a new collaborator that we've been working with recently on a few projects. But this is the first thing we've actually done together. He's a breath artist, vocal percussionist, and beatboxer. He talks about his practice in those 3 ways. Actually showed he's on both of these tracks. So that's what it is. And Eric has kind of, in a lot of ways, taken on the role of producer in these projects where, you know, I guess we would say I'm the composer, but Eric is the producer as composer, or composer as producer, where he's, you know, taking a lot of the things that we send him and figuring out not only how to, you know, put it on the screen to produce it video wise, but how to mix it and, you know, make it sound the way it does. Also how to make choices on, oh, maybe we need a little bit more of this or a little less of this. So I feel like that process is something that we think about more with pop music. But I think over a long period of time now, I think the differentiation between classical music and pop music isn't quite, you know, I think there's been a spectrum for a long time where, you know, Brian Eno, when we think about the ambient music he makes, that's not pop, you know. I think he composes music and works in the studio as an instrument. And I think we've found in this moment that we work somewhere in the middle there too, where we're very comfortable working in a studio. We're very comfortable playing live shows. We don't make pop music. I'm not sure we make classical music, you know, and I think, and I'm not sure it's our job to figure out what kind of music we make. You know, I think we just make music as artists. Maybe that's
Victoria's job. She's gonna figure
exactly,
that
that's what I was just
out.
thinking. I was absolutely thinking that. I feel like if the artists and composers start to think too much about what kind of music they're making and how to frame it in those ways, it gets less useful. But I think it's very useful to have somebody brilliant like Victoria have a bigger view of it and be able to kind of figure those things out over the long term. So anyway, these are two. The set of music is something like, you know, 10 or 12 pieces, and so these are 2 of them that we've maybe it's just actually this is the most recent thing we've done. So maybe that's also good context to some sharing.
Okay, awesome. Did you want to like physically share the things that you're working on?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
over
sorry.
Zoom?
Yeah. Does Eric, are you pulling them up? Is that what you're doing right now? Is that what that face is?
Oh, no, I
Oh,
wasn't. Sorry,
nice.
I didn't know if there was a
I could
screen
be.
share.
Could one of us screen share them? Is that an easy thing to do? Can you
Yes.
make us a...
I enabled multiple participants sharing simultaneously, so that should be okay.
Thanks for
Um,
saying something, Jenny, or else we both would have been just sitting here thinking the other person was sharing their screen.
Just 1 second.
Mhm.
And I get one more thing for context that I think is it's in some ways very common for the percussion tradition we come from, where, or just the contemporary music and experimental music tradition that we come from. Oftentimes, a composer, and if any of you all do any of you guys compose music? Anybody? You know, I think what's interesting, or thinking about the composers that you know play, both in orchestra and out of orchestra. I think, you know, a composer has to choose what parameters of music they're going to control, right? And I think in some ways with orchestra music, in some ways we take for granted that oftentimes, I think, because the force is so big, and because of some things that happen in classical music of just control, you know, that oftentimes a composer will control most of parameters of an orchestral piece, oftentimes. Maybe the percussion section, in a lot of ways, maybe you all are making the biggest choices in terms of, like, you know, if a composer says symbol, you know, the symbol you choose for Debussy and the symbol you choose for Mahler and the symbol you choose for, you know, Takemitsu versus Gershwin are going to be very different, right? But so in some ways, the percussionist curating your own sounds, that's something that's very natural. And yes, every flute sounds different and every violin sounds different. But I think that oftentimes the difference between the sounds a percussionist chooses are maybe more noticeable, right? So in a lot of the music we play, those things are open in big ways. Some of the John Cage music I was mentioning, you know, the orchestration looks like, you know, everybody choose 5 tin cans, you know, everybody choose 3 drums. So I think if we had some awesome way for us all to close our eyes, picture 5 tin cans, picture 3 drums, and then put those up on the screen, I have a feeling we wouldn't all be picturing the same thing, right? Like somebody could be picturing 3 timpani, somebody could be picturing 3 bongo drums, somebody could be picturing, you know, 1 drum from, you know, Bali, and 1 drum from, you know, Korea, and 1 taiko drum from Japan. Somebody else could be picturing a drum set, right? You could picture drastically different things for what these sounds are. You could picture tuna fish cans versus, you know, popcorn tins, right? Like for what a tin can is. So the idea that as percussionists, we're choosing what the piece sounds like is in a lot of ways really radical, right? The idea that a composer is saying, I'm gonna say what rhythms to play, I'm gonna say how loud to play them, I'm gonna say how fast to play them. You choose what the actual sound that the audience is hearing is. It's kind of a radical choice, and it's kind of a choice that we're really steeped in. So oftentimes the music that we write controls things like rhythms and pitches, but doesn't control orchestration. So the pieces that we're going to listen to aren't written for choir and string section with drums, or they aren't written for, you know, beatbox or drum set and keyboards. You know, those are the iterations that we made for this Brooklyn Bound series that we're doing, and the next time we do them, we'll make them differently. Does that make sense? Like, and I think, you know, that's something that we've become so excited about and accustomed to. But I guess just realizing that, like, you know, or maybe it's more like a jazz quintet, right? Like, so like if a not that we're in any way improvise like that or something, but if a group chooses to play a Miles Davis piece, you know, a tune, Miles Davis doesn't say you need these instruments, right? The tune says there's this melody, there's these chord changes, there's this speed, right? And so, you know, a flutist could play the melody, or an accordion player could play the melody, or a trumpet with a harmon mute could play a melody, but that's more open like that. So that's in some ways something that's influenced our work, I guess. Eric, did I cover that transition like a master?
We're ready to go. Yeah. For some reason, it's not giving me the option to optimize for video. So I hope that the video looks okay, but somebody shout if it does not look okay. Woo! um, yeah, so you can see like we've sort of figured out how to, like, I'm by no means an amazing video producer, but I sort of have figured out enough to be able to put people on screen together. And um, occasionally, like with the static on that one, we were going for a more distorted sound from everybody in the ensemble for that one, and so we were looking for like some kind of visual element that could kind of heighten that underlying fuzziness or intensity. So yeah, I mean, like, kind of in line with that question that we were asking ourselves at the beginning of the pandemic, like what are the things that are possible right now that are different than what we normally do? I mean, I have done some video editing for performances over the years. We've done a bunch of projects over the years that involve having video with us while we're on stage. And sometimes I've been the person to help set up and run that video. Sometimes I've made that video for projects of ours. And so I had a version of Final Cut that I could use, but the pandemic has definitely given me the opportunity to become a lot more familiar with what's possible there. I would definitely recommend anybody who uses Mac, who uses Apple computers. I think the Pro bundle that includes Logic and Final Cut, there's an education price that's like $200, which is ridiculously cheap for two pieces of software that are incredibly useful like that. And I feel like right now, the pandemic is just an incredible opportunity to become more familiar with that stuff. When I was in conservatory, it definitely was not a thing that anybody thought you needed to know to have any sense of how to record, right? But these days, everybody records themselves, whether it's, to make an audition tape for something or to like make your own albums. Being familiar with how to record is really, really useful in a ton of different ways. And while we're all dealing with this stuff and we're on laptops all the time, why not become more familiar with it, spend some time getting to know, how do I put this stuff together? How do I make it work? So I would be able to bring up a session to kind of show you how we put those together, but I wonder, if there's only 20 or so minutes left here, we could move to the questions that you guys had, or if there were any questions that came up about those two videos.
I will keep it open for people. Does anybody want to ask questions about the video? Or I know some of you submitted questions. If you want to say those out loud, go ahead. Or I can also go ahead and say one out loud because I have them very conveniently.
I have a question about what Eric just said about recording. I mean, like, are you guys totally self-taught in that? Or like, I know you've probably like worked with recording engineers like a lot, or, like, how do you get that information, or how did you get that information?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's a little funny. I actually was a double major in recording when I went to conservatory, but I didn't actually learn a whole ton in the program that I was in was really heavy on the math side first. So you had to learn the acoustics and the math, and then they let you actually work in the recording studio. And I dropped out of the program before I got into the studio. So I had a little bit of a background in understanding some things about acoustics and whatnot, but I would say I feel like most of what I've learned from recording has been trial and error, experimenting with it myself. And actually, having been a person who studied recording, I know that a lot of the people I was in school with, when you study recording professionally, many of the people that I was in school with ended up going into like speaker design or software design or like the very technical back end aspects. A lot of people I know who make records learned by sitting in studios and watching other people do it. So like Jason said, we've done a few projects that have happened in the studio. So there's this composer, Caroline Shaw, who we're good friends with. If you guys don't know Caroline's music, you absolutely should. She won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago for a piece she wrote called Partita for Eight Voices, for a group called Roomful of Teeth she sings in. She's written a few projects for So recently, and we actually just made an album of songs with her over the last couple of years that we made the tracks together in the studio. And so we were working with this engineer named John Lowe, who works really closely with the band called The National, that we've also done some collaborations with. Sorry, it's just like a million names out here. But like being in a room with somebody like that who really knows what they're doing and is very quickly if you watch them working, you can very quickly pick up on like, well, how are they going to cut this together? Where do they find a place that's good to splice between these two different things we're trying to do? So, I would say I picked up more from watching him work than I did from any study that I did in school.
I would just say, as somebody who knows very little about it myself and feels like I've been getting into it myself, like that the idea of home recording has been like I could always make sound in the computer. I could always get sound into the computer, and I know how to work in Logic, or if Eric was mentioning if anybody uses Mac or Apple, GarageBand comes for free. My Logic computer hasn't been working for a long time, and I've been in GarageBand for this whole pandemic, sending things to producers that have made their ways onto albums, just recording right into GarageBand. So there's like a lot that you can do before you spend money too, like I think, and having the skill, to me, there's like, I think everybody on the call should have the skill, if you're going to get into music, to be able to take a microphone. And maybe Harvard, I know at Princeton you can go to the studio in the music building and sign out a microphone, sign out an audio interface if you're not spending money on that stuff right now, which can add up. But to have a microphone, to get sound into your computer in a way that's not distorted, in a way that you could send it to an engineer that they could use it, that just feels like a kind of technical skill that maybe should just be added to all of our curriculums. Just like, what a C major chord is, what a C minor chord is. We probably all know what diminished chords are, half diminished and full diminished. Maybe we get confused, but like, right? We all have some skill on like these basics of harmony, basics of rhythm, basics of sound recording. Feels like we're just at that moment where that's expected of people working in the music world. And then taking it to the next level, like Eric said, I think I'll say for me, it's a lot trial and error, learning how to cut. You just have to do it, and you'll learn like in your audio track, where can you cut something together where nobody hears it, and it's an art, not a science in a lot of ways. So I think the trial and error is really big.
Jason's not going to say this, but he's on the last Taylor Swift album that just came out. First track, I think, Jay, is that right? And I think that's stuff you recorded at home, right?
I did, and it's just be embarrassing if she ever knew how that was recorded. Just so lo-fi, but it got its way to the person that needed it in a way that was usable. So it was just like I'm not an expert at it, but I think I have the skill to be able to say yes when I get asked to do a job. And that feels like we should all have that. I've been spending the last couple months trying to get better than just being able to say yes, because it's really fun to get good at something. But it does feel like there's just, and Eric's right. If I wasn't 43, I think I would also feel like I should have those skills in video, right? Because I think the way so much of, luckily I'm in a group where somebody has that skill, it feels like all of us need that ability to get the projects we're doing out into the world in different ways. And so it's not the most fun thing. Well, maybe it can be the most fun thing to think about, though. It's like as musicians, as ensemble members, when we play a concert for an audience, we think about the way it sounds first. We also think about the way it looks, the way it feels, the way the audience feels when they're in the space, the way the concert feels. Like all of those things are important, right? Not just, people don't come to the concert hall, close their eyes, and listen to music, right? It's like it's how, it's why orchestras are trying to think so hard about how to get younger people in the door, because younger people walk into an orchestra space and think like, it's not for me. The vibe doesn't feel like the way I listen to music, right? So all of us need to think about the social cues we give when we're sharing music with each other, how open the space is when people are hearing new things, how classical music, what are the barriers to entry for all of us, so I think thinking about that in terms of how to make video and audio and put it into the world, if we think about it in that broadest sense, it can be kind of exciting, actually.
Yeah, I would also just add that I have a ton of admiration for the changes that have been happening in the music department at Harvard, and we've worked with Vijay Iyer a bunch and gotten to talk to him about how those changes came about. And I think it's stuff that we're thinking about a lot these days too. And so, there is unfortunately, there are a lack of diverse voices in the part of the music world that we have made most of our career, and we really want to see that change. And part of what keeps that going is, there's a lot of people who think that music can only be made when there's a sheet of paper and when everybody sits down and there's a conductor or whatever. And technology really helps to break down barriers. There are a ton of amazing musicians we work with who can't read music, but like the fact that they can send us a recording of themselves, and I think Jason was talking about this with Shodike, the artist who's on that those videos that we just showed. He's writing a piece for us right now that's not on paper. He's sending us parts where he records himself making them, and we transcribe them into a language that we can understand so that we can perform them. But then that means that there's a possibility for collaboration there that just wouldn't exist without the technology helping to make it possible.
That's so cool to hear. Yeah, I agree. I'm really, well, the people that Harvard has doing music right now are really, really cool. Does anybody else have questions going off of that or anything else? Okay, I also have one from this very convenient list that I have, unless either of you want to also say anything else about.
No, I was just going to say, I find comfort, like every once in a while during these pandemic times, like we haven't given a class together like this. We were doing a lot in the spring, but we haven't in a while. We kind of only need one question and then we'll get us past 3 o'clock. So if anybody has, we're just going to, once there's one question in the room, we're going to go back and forth. So, yeah, whichever one you have on your list. No, I'm just joking. We can get through a couple, Jenny.
I was going to say, you covered so much off that one question about recording, but it's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And also thanks for saying so much, because we are definitely also facing the problem of like how to bring something that's supposed to be experienced in person onto digital. And that's been an adventure. Okay. Well, actually, a lot of these questions you guys have touched on. Okay, an interesting one that I have is, what do you say to people who say they don't like new music?
In scare quotes.
In scare quotes.
Yeah, I mean, most of our, I understand what they mean when they say that, but there's so many things that are taken for granted that you have to, right? You have to agree to so many of the things that you think they mean, right? Because I think when somebody says that, I think they mean, I don't know, they don't mean new music. Actually, like part of what's in their head is like 1950s modernism or something. It's like Schoenberg and Weber, and I think are in most people's heads when they're saying that, like some weird sense of blip, 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 kind of some sense of that's new music. And I have no, I mean, I'll say for myself, I find interest in that music when I'm looking at the paper. I don't find interest in that music when I'm just taking it in as an experience. It's not actually a judgment necessarily. That's just, that's a subjective opinion of for myself. For me, I think I tell them to come to our show. Like I feel like if somebody gives, well, I don't know what I tell them. I don't have a good soapbox, but what I think is, I enjoy taking in new things. I don't have to love everything I hear at a concert to have a good experience. And if I love everything at a concert, maybe that's not a good thing, right? I think for me, art music is something that I want to challenge some of my sensibilities and to be excited about. So I find I have all these things are flooding me with this question. I have 2 things I want to say about it. One, I go back to 1997. I had an experience in 1997 at a club in Rochester, New York. I went to Eastman School of Music. There was a club called the Water Street Music Hall. There was the singer Michelle Ndegeocello. I don't know if anybody knows her music. It's amazing. Her drummer's name is Gene Lake, who's amazing. And I remember going to that concert and having the experience where I could just listen and dance to that music and love it. I could analyze that music, analyze the lyrics, analyze the rhythm, analyze the feel, and be blown away by it. And I love music that I can take in on both levels. I think I don't like, only kind of being like, wow, that's really amazing. And then you dig in and you're like, there's nothing of substance there. It's all surface. I don't enjoy that. I also want to be brought in by the surface. I want to be brought into the substance, So I feel like that's why I mentioned the kind of, minimalist scene that we've really loved. I think much of that music, so Steve Reich, Philip Glass, Terry Riley, we're learning more about Julius Eastman now, who I didn't know so much about Julius Eastman. I think Pauline Oliveros, Meredith Monk, like a lot of the music that was made in the 70s, or Miles Davis, I feel like is just as good an example in jazz, where the kind of surface, the tricky harmonies of bebop, the tricky kind of language that moves so quick that you don't know what's going on as an audience member, is a little bit similar to me as the trickiness of a kind of European modernism that doesn't give you anything to hold on to. And Miles Davis solved that problem by saying, I'm going to go in crazy directions, but I'm going to sit in one place modally for us all to, like, I'm going to know where we're at harmonically and then go crazy places everywhere else, but have one thing that feels like the listener has an end to. And for my ears, which, I mean, I'm a percussionist, so, you know, but my ears, you know, maybe aren't as good as others in the orchestra. I've studied music for a long time. And if I can't understand that language of the scare quotes new music, my mom definitely doesn't have a way into that, right? So I feel like we, in so oftentimes play music that has, I feel, a surface that can be inviting, or some layer, some level of the music that can bring in a listener. That could be the theater of it. It could be the sounds of the harmonies are comfortable in a modal kind of way. It could be the rhythms or something I understand, but something to bring a listener in, and then be challenging on other levels. I don't think challenge is a bad thing. I feel like challenge is a good thing. But the other thing that came flooded to me in this moment was a friend of ours who used to be in a founding member, Doug Perkins. He used to teach at the Boston Conservatory, actually, in Boston. And I feel like the scare quote new music thing, you know, he talks a lot about music as opposed to, like, you know, classical music and pop music or art music and this. He calls it more like there's sometimes music and maybe always music, you know. And maybe I don't you know, but for me it's like I make sometimes music, you know. As much as when I sit down on that drum set, maybe there are a couple rhythms came out in that track that you heard that maybe felt pop influenced because there's a bass and a snare drum. Nothing we make is popular, right? We make things that people will listen to sometimes. It's not going to be for you all the time, right? It's not our goal. If we were making music for somebody to listen to all the time, that by definition, I think, is popular, like popular music, right? So like when I'm at home, you know, I cooked pancake breakfast for my family this morning. We're not listening to European art music in that moment. That's not what my house listens to, right? Like we're going to listen to a Beatles record, or, you know, Diana Ross right now is big in our house, or whatever. We're going to listen to pop music, you know? So I think I would say to somebody who's scared of new music, it's like, go give it a try. And if you like one thing, that's awesome. You don't have to like everything, you know? And I feel like I say that from the stage a lot, which is like, the goal of coming to a show like this is not to take your medicine and eat your greens, you know. It's not that, but it's also not to come and be like, you know, it's not a Hollywood movie, you know. You're coming to learn new things about yourself and share new experiences, but also it's okay to not like things, you know. I need to work on the elevator pitch of that to get it down to one sentence, but that's what I think.
Yeah, I was just going to toss in, like, I think usually when somebody says they hate a whole genre of music, that just means that they haven't listened to it, right? Like they don't really know what they're talking about. And that's fine. I mean, like that, sorry, that's not to like disparage anyone who says that, but like when I was a kid growing up in suburban Ohio, you know, I played in a metal band and I listened to like metal and punk. That was like, and I would have told you at the time, I hate country music.
I knew it's that, right? It's always I hate country, or other people say I hate rap. Those are the two
Yeah.
things that just get said.
But like, what did I know? What I knew of country was like Garth Brooks or Reba McEntire or something like that. And like, it wasn't until much later that I heard Johnny Cash or John Prine or Merle Haggard or Dolly Parton. I seriously, have you guys listened to the Dolly Parton podcast that Chad Abumrad from Radiolab made? Unbelievable. And I like learned so much about her career that I didn't know before. It's incredible. And so like, I definitely like a lot of country music. I just hadn't found the country music that I was psyched about. And I'm sure even Garth Brooks, if I listened to him more, there would be things that I like and things that I didn't like.
You
And
don't need
that's
to
what
go,
Jason's
don't
saying.
go too crazy.
It's like everybody likes, you know, if you listen to something and you give it an honest chance, you're going to find something you like. You're probably going to find something you don't like, and that's okay. Like that's why at So Percussion concerts we really encourage people, don't feel like you have to like the whole thing, but if you liked some of it, hang on to those moments and think about why you liked them. And if the stuff you didn't like, also think about why you didn't like that too, because that's cool. Um, I don't know, the composer Joan Tower we've worked with a few times, and she talks about being programmed as the limp lettuce on a concert. Like, you know, there's like the burger and the cheese and everything, but like the new music piece gets the 5-minute limp lettuce between the Mahler symphony and the concerto with the famous soloist. And if that's people's context for experiencing something, then maybe they haven't heard the coolest piece, or maybe they haven't had the right context for hearing that piece. And so I think that the way new music exists in the particular niche of classical music, or it has existed there for a long time, has not really given it the best chance to succeed. But also, man, like that world is changing so fast. Like there are gonna be fewer orchestras in this country after the pandemic than there were when it started, right? Like that's just a reality. And that's not to say that orchestras are going away, but the world is changing. And like, um, anyway, you know, like I think the exciting thing is that we all can be a part of figuring out like what are the things we want to make sure come back after the pandemic, and what are the things that like are maybe going to change.
If I could throw in one more thing as a challenge, because I know when I was your age, either if you're an undergrad or a graduate student, for me, both of those times of my life, I feel like I was describing what I loved about music in the negative. You know, there was all the things I didn't like, and this is what I liked. You know, and it was a very small, very um, snobby approach to what classical music or what experimental music I liked. It was defined the opposite. And I think there is a time in your life where if you're especially if you compose music, I think maybe it's natural to go through that, right? Where you're very critical and you're defining your tastes. And I think developing your own aesthetics is really important. And so there's maybe a place for that. But then the majority of your life, I think, and I feel like I learned this from working, we work in the Princeton music department, and I don't know, Victoria, if you would agree with this. What I found with the vast majority of folks who teach in the Princeton Music Department, they go to a show looking for what they like about the music on stage, like looking to find a way in. You know what I mean? And it could be like, you know, a composer that is diametrically opposed to the you know, the style of another composer, but you're looking for like, oh wow, the way they combine that crazy, like, you know, high bass harmonic with that flute was amazing. You know, they're looking for the positive in it. And it took me like many years to get to a place where like I'm going to concerts now looking for the positive in something, as opposed to like, oh, I know I'm not going to like that. I know I'm not going to like that. Oh, I'm coming because my friend is playing in this one piece that I may like. You know, like I was going to the concert already knowing what I didn't like. And maybe this is not speaking to anybody else on the call. Maybe you all have much more open tastes than I did. But it's possible that like that's an important thing to go through at a certain point. But then I think much more of our lives can be spent looking for what we can get out of something in a positive way. You know, so I think the scare quotes new music person is also going just knowing they're already going to hate it, you know? And so there's nothing we can change necessarily about the, you know, but we can change our own actions, you know? And if I could do it as an old dog learning new tricks, like you guys can get there probably quicker.
I'm going to put the Dolly Parton podcast in the comments just so that you all check it out, because it's really worth a listen. It's like 9 episodes or something like that. Very good. I don't know. Do we have time for one more?
One more. It's fun to answer. One more.
Let's do it. Floor is open to any of you. I'll give you a couple of seconds and I'll just say something.
The challenging Zoom silence vacuum is really scary.
Oh yeah, you have no idea. Yeah. So I can just jump in. Going off of what Eric, you just said something about seeing what's going to be kept after all of this COVID is done, if it ever will be done. What do you both see as being kept, and what do you hope to see maybe not kept, but like, what do you think will change, and what do you hope will what do you hope will come out of all of this?
Well, I'll say for myself, I feel like I've had so many conversations with people who are realizing how much they value live performance right now. So the the fact that people value being in a room together and listening to music in a room together, that is like more clear now than ever before. Um, I would say that a lot of my favorite musical experiences have been in like small rooms with smaller groups of people, and I do think that sometimes like it's amazing that there are institutions where there are thousands of seats to get together and hear people do things on stage. Those institutions often cost a lot of money, and um, it's it's a really challenge. We run a nonprofit to run So Percussion, um, and it's been challenging for us. Like Jason said, most of all of our concerts got canceled, and we've had to figure out how to survive. We have employees. We need to keep paying them during this, and luckily we've had donors and foundations that have helped us to get through it. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the biggest organizations end up shrinking. And what I really hope they focus on is like how to have more intimate experiences for people, like those for me are often the more powerful ones. So I don't know what that means like writ large. I don't know what it means for the Met Opera to have a more intimate version of an opera or something like that. But I kind of like in the biggest picture, that's what I would hope.
Yeah, I feel like I concur with that. I think a lot of I think both the pandemic, and then a couple months into the pandemic, I think George Floyd's murder and a larger conversation about Black Lives Matter in the communities that we're a part of, in the contemporary music scene, and in the academic institutions that we're a part of. I think both of those things have led to really, really good and overdue questioning of the ways things work, right? The systems are being questioned everywhere in positive ways. And I think it's also on, I think we feel like we run a small non-for-profit, but we run a nonprofit organization that needs to think about the way we, run. And so I feel like after this, um, to me, it's going to be the things that we've noticed, because not only have our concerts gone online, but we run like a summer festival, a summer institute where students get together in space. And so that has gone online. And once that went online in July, there were a lot of things that we could question. It's like, wow, why do we do things this way? Like, we've done this for 10 years. And so you get calcified in the way you do things. Wait, we could do things in all different ways. Like, um, what skills does somebody need to make interesting experimental music? We definitely took for granted the, like, does somebody have to hold 4 mallets and be able to play it? No, that's one awesome way to make music. But if somebody can turn knobs on a synthesizer that they built themselves in ways that are really interesting, why can't they make music in our scene? So I think we've been able to question some things about ourselves, that I think those things should stay after the pandemic. I think the music going online to virtual concerts that aren't that interesting to take in, like trying to recreate a live experience in a Zoom space, those things I feel like we should leave behind. And I think we should question, we've had a hard time with this. So it's like when we question like putting things up as videos, making sure they're not just recreating what would happen in a space with people, because those aren't the same thing. So I feel like there are going to be things we want to leave behind, like, yeah, let's get in a room and experience things together again. But what we experience and how we experience it and why we experience it, those things I think we should keep questioning after the pandemic. And in a weird way, it's been good for institutions to have to ask those questions, because or else I think a lot of like our summer festival maybe wouldn't have changed these thoughts, because it was going pretty fine beforehand, just not questioning ourselves. But it's like, wait, it could be so much cooler if we think about different ways to make music. So I think the questioning, I guess, is what I'm hoping stays. But the people in a room, I can't wait to actually let's just recreate this after the pandemic. Let's just get in a space together, you know, in Cambridge and have coffee and talk about these things. That I'm looking forward to for sure.